Time for another Brothers Grimm video, but this one is actually probably the most upsetting. No cannibalism, no sexual assault, but these are the Brothers Grimm anti-Semitic fairy tales. At first I was surprised that was a thing, but then I was like, of course that's a thing. Some people have made arguments that some fairy tales like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs or just other ones involving dwarves have elements of anti-Semitism in it, but of the 211 folktales published in the last edition by the Brothers Grimm, 3 of them specifically have Jewish characters, usually called a Jew or the Jew. The first 2 are wildly Nazi-era propaganda anti-Semitic. The third one, kind of neutral. And if you're wondering, did the Nazis use these in their propaganda? Yes, they did. So saying up front, this is upsetting, this is racist, but I do think it's important to know about them and look at them. I'm not German, I don't live in Germany, so I don't know what these tales, how they're regarded there now, but I know that in America, as Americans, we like to just not look at ugly parts of our past. We like to pretend they didn't happen so that we can just pretend we've always been super great, but it's important not to do that. It's important to look at reality, in my opinion. So the first of the 3 stories we're going to talk about is The Good Bargain. It's mostly the kind of folktale about a big fool who makes a bunch of foolish decisions but then still wins anyway, just with offensive Jewish stereotypes thrown in. It starts with this dude who sells his cow for $7, the money system at the time, and he passes by a bunch of frogs that are saying acht, acht, acht. And that to him sounds like the German word for 8, acht. And so he gets in a fight with the frogs and he's like, no, I sold it for 7. And he ends up throwing the money at the frogs. He's like, you count it. It sinks to the bottom of the pond. He doesn't get them back and he's mad. He feels like the frogs defrauded him. So he decides to sell his other cow for butchering, and he goes to meet the butcher, and then a bunch of wild dogs plus the butcher's dog run up and meet him, and they're barking at him, and he's like, oh, you'll take this meat and give it to the butcher and he'll pay me back later? Okay. And so he gives the meat to the dogs. They obviously eat the meat. They do not bring him money later, and he feels like he's been cheated again. So he goes to the king, tells him the whole story, and the king is just like, I'm sorry, what, bro? But the princess who's there laughs, and the king is like, oh my god, she's never laughed in her whole life, and you made her laugh. Here, you can have my daughter. But the peasant's like, nah, I'm already married. I got one woman at home nagging me. I don't want another. So the king is offended, and he's tricky, and he's like, all right, come back in 3 days, and I'll give you 500. He doesn't say 500 what. So he's going home. He brags about how he's going to get all this money in 3 days. And he meets a soldier who's like, let me have some of it. That's too much money for you. And he's like, all right, you can have 200. And then he meets a Jew. The Jewish character's like, if you give me the rest of the money, I'll exchange it for smaller coins with you. And the guy's like, sure, you give me the smaller coins now and I'll give you the big ones when I get them. So the Jew gives him the money, but of course he's a bad guy. So every other coin he gives him is a counterfeit one because he's planning to rip him off. So he goes to stand before the king, and the king is like, yeah, the 500 I'm going to give you, it's not money, it's blows. Like, I'm going to beat you. But the soldier's like, hey, I promised 200 to the soldier and the other 300 to this Jew, so they get my blows. And the king does it. He's like impressed that the peasant was this clever. And so he's like, go in my treasure room and like take whatever you can fit in your pockets. So the peasant leaves, he goes to a bar, and he's actually complaining about how he should have been given more. The Jew overhears this, and he's mad about the blows thing, so he goes to the king, and he's like, he was dissing you, king, and the king's like, bring him to me. So the Jew goes to the guy, and he's like, the king wants to see you, and he's like, well, I can't see him dressed shabbily like this, and the Jew wants to get him there so he can get his revenge, and so he's like, here, take my fine coat and wear it. And he's like, okay, so they go before the king. When the king's like, hey, this Jew said that you've been saying this terrible stuff about me, he's like, you can't believe anything he says. He's a liar. In fact, I'll bet he'll tell you this coat of mine is his. And of course the Jew's like, yes, it is my coat. And the king's like, well, the Jew must have lied to either me or the peasant, so either way, he gets the blows. And the peasant walks away with the fine coat and all the money, and he says, what a good bargain. This next one is actually entitled A Jew Among the Thorns. Sometimes the Jew in the Thorns. That is the title of this fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm that is in every collection that you will buy. I mean, I'm sure there's some edited collections somewhere, but yeah. So the servant gets rewarded for a lot of hard work with some money, and he's traveling along the road and he meets this dwarf. The dwarf's like, you should give me the money because you're young and fit and you can get plenty more. And he gives it to the dwarf, and the dwarf is like, you know, for your kindness, I'm going to give you 3 wishes. So he asks for a bird hunting gun that'll always hit its target, a fiddle that will make anyone who can hear it dance, anytime he plays it, and the power to have any offer he makes, the other person has to take it. So he keeps traveling and he meets a Jew. They see a bird and the Jew's like, hey, could you kill that bird for me? And he's got his magic gun, so he kills the bird, but it falls in a bunch of thorns. And he's like, Jew, go in there and get the bird out of the thorns. And so he crawls into the thorns, and then the guy thinks, direct quote, this man, because he's a Jew, has tortured people long enough with his slave-driving ways, so he decides to start playing his fiddle and makes the Jew dance in the thorn bush, and he begs him to stop as it tears up his flesh and his clothes. Eventually, the dude won't stop until the Jew promises him all the money he has on him, and then he stops. The Jew gives him the money, but he goes into town and he says, this guy extorted me and abused me for my money. I want justice. They arrest the guy. They're about to hang him, and he's like, I want one more request, to play my fiddle. And the Jew is like, no, don't let him play the fiddle. But the king's like, sure. And of course he plays it. It makes everyone start dancing, and the Jew is among them, also dancing. He's like, I'm not gonna stop playing until the Jew admits that the money that I took from him, he stole in the first place. Because he assumes that or knows that somehow. And the Jew says, yes, I did. He admits it. Although, I mean, you would have said anything to make it stop, so who knows how true it is. They release the youth and they hang the Jew in his place. That's the happy ending. The last one is the only one that's kind of neutral. So in this one, a dude just encounters a Jewish guy on the road, beats the crap out of him, and robs him. And as the Jew is dying, he curses him. And he's like, may the bright sun bring this to light. That's the title of this fairy tale. The bright sun brings it to light. So the guy gets away with it. He ends up, being a successful tailor. He gets married. And then one day he's drinking his coffee and the sunlight shines on it. And he's like, that makes me think of something. And his wife's like, what does that make you think of? And he's like, I'll tell you, but you can't tell anyone. And when she says sure, he's like, oh, I beat up and killed this Jew once. And he said that the bright sunshine would bring it to light, but it didn't. It's just shining on my coffee. But of course, the woman goes to her good friend and tells her. It gets around, the guy gets arrested, and he gets executed. So the curse came true. I'd like to think that there's some kind of good message here, because it was bad that he killed him and he gets punished for it, but the fact that he can curse him makes him pretty much on the level of a witch or an evil dwarf or something, which is, the problem in itself. So apparently there's debate among scholars about how much the brothers Grimm actually believed these things themselves, or if they were just a reflection of the people they collected these tales from at the time. It's probably both, honestly. People told them these tales, but then they decided to put these tales in their book. I almost didn't make this video because I don't like propagating these ideas, but like I said earlier, I do feel like it's important to look at it, and if I'm making all these videos about the original fairy tales, well, not original, but some of the oldest known versions, and about the Brothers Grimm editions, I feel like I have to mention it. It just can't go unmentioned. I usually try to find some clever way to plug my book here, but nah. I guess I can say that it is not overly offensive to any race or group of people, or at least I hope not. I tried really hard. White privilege is a thing. Unconscious bias is a thing. The characters in my book are all white, but they have Romani ancestry. The Romani are often known by a slur that starts with a G that I won't say. And my publishing company paid for a Romani sensitivity reader to read through it and make sure that I was being true and that I wasn't offending the culture and all of that. So I guess I'll leave it with that. Sensitivity readers, great thing. Necessary thing. The Brothers Grimm obviously did not have them and wouldn't have wanted them. But hopefully in some ways our world's better now. Or hopefully it will be.